Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. Dr. Antoine Hickman, I'm the Assistant State Superintendent. I've been able to attend the last couple of sessions. I've been here since November 15th. And had the opportunity just to say hello. You will notice that neither Dr. Wright nor Dr. Collins are here. They send, it's not condolences, they're just sorry that they had to miss our meeting. But Governor Westmore is here at MSDE. He's meeting with MSDE staff. Dr. And leadership, and Dr. Wright and Dr. Collins had to make sure that they attend to represent us well to share some of the things that are going on with MSDE and how to help move the state of Maryland forward in terms of education. I want to thank you all for participating in the past few months as we've gone through our small group work sessions. You provided various input on how to make things better, how to make things better in schools, how to make things better across the state of Maryland, but also how to make things better here with the work group. We'll review some of those topics shortly. I just want to note that we will ask your feedback at the end of today's session so that we move forward. In front of you, see the presentation outline, so we'll do welcome introductions. Ms. Zogby will speak in a moment. Then we'll do public comment. We'll talk about ARC of future discussions. That conversation will be led briefly by Mr. Nate Levinson, a facilitator. We're going to look at MSD, the overview on our current specialty design instruction guidance, things that you've read over in the past weeks and some of you responded to, and how our conversation will go this evening. We have a panel of special design instructional experts that are from our work group that will respond to some questions and give us some things to think about. Then we'll break into some small group discussion. From that, we'll have a large group share out. There'll be an exit ticket. You'll hear more about that you'll receive, and a wrap up and closing. Those are the things, and that's the order that we will follow. As you know, we're going to try to fit those things in between now and 6 o'clock, but we may run a little over because we have public comment, but we want to get a full 2 hours of instruction. So instruction, collaboration with one another. Ms. Zogby.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've missed you. And so we're so glad to be back together again after 2 months. And I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday and a good start to 2024. And we're really excited to kick off 2024 and the work of the work group this year. You can sort of feel the energy right now in our state. Last week, there was the exciting Science of Reading resolution that was passed by the state board, and the timeline from MSDE on the development of their comprehensive early literacy plan. And that really rests on this belief, this foundational belief that all children can learn to read. So that's heartening, I think, for all of us, and so important to the work that we are doing together. And there's also this buzz, right, in Maryland during these couple months of the legislative session, while people come from different perspectives to do some problem solving together. And again, you know, I feel like that's what we're here to do. And so we'll feed into all of that energy and get started. Dr. Hickman mentioned, you know, a couple changes that we made, and we indicated these in an email to you a couple of weeks ago. But just to sort of recap, we're going to do the next 2 meetings fully virtual to give that a go and see how it goes. And then we can kind of assess how everybody feels about that. We have a structure that I think is going to provide a lot of different opportunities for people to make sure that their voices are heard and they share their ideas. So the pre-readings going out, you're invited to send in that written comments. You know, we're not looking for essays. It doesn't have to be, this is not a term paper. Any kinds of comments you want to send in, we want to read and circulate to everyone. We're going to have these small group discussions, large group share outs. And then at the end of each session, right at the very end of today, I'll ask you to just jot down a couple notes quickly so that you have some takeaways in your brain that you've put down on a piece of paper. And then you will get in your email box a link to the exit ticket so that you can follow up in the next couple of days with some comments. And we will hear more about that later on. And that will be an opportunity for you to advance any kinds of recommendations that you would like us to then discuss on this topic at the outset of our next meeting. And then I just really want to very quickly just do a quick recap of kind of where we've gone, because we've been away from each other for a little while. So, we started off talking about the data, and Cliff Notes version is the data is not great. So that's where we started. We then really did a sort of reset of expectations of both kind of uppercase and lowercase kind of expectations. What does the law say about the standards that students should be held to? And how IEP should enable students to meet standards. And also those kind of hearts and minds expectations that educators and families and students themselves have about what it is that they can achieve. And then we turned to general education, and we talked about how all students are general education students first. And that framework of a multi-tiered system of support is the framework that ensures that students get the right support at the right time. And I looked back over the small group sessions that we did, discussions during that last MTSS conversation, and people talked about the need for capacity building, collaborative time, scheduling, inclusive mindset. And one of the very consistent themes was the importance of specially designed instruction across all the tiers. And so now we will turn to specially designed instruction as our topic for tonight. And the guiding question, which is what evidence-based instruction and related services will enable all students with disabilities to meet the standards and expectations under IDEA. And that our discussion tonight will provide input and support for the work of MSDE under that recommendation of expectations that we approved at our meeting on November 28th. So onward to public comment, and looking forward to the next couple hours with you.
Thank you. So we do have two registered commenters today. The first one actually shared her comments in writing with me, so I will read them aloud. The guest is Julie Gaskins, and her comments are regarding Title I schools and the IEP process in Baltimore City, specific to grade fixing and GO students. What she says is more than 90% of the schools in Baltimore City are Title I schools. According to MSDE data, approximately 12% of the student population identifies as students with disabilities. While the categories are vast, the main point remains that students with disabilities have a right to a free and appropriate public education as mandated by federal and state law. While Montgomery County is identified as having the largest population of students with disabilities at 20.1%, Baltimore City is represented by half that amount, 10.4%. This brings us to the Inspector General of Education reports, where it was clearly documented that enrollment fraud was prevalent, grades were altered or fixed, and students were promoted despite barely knowing how to read or do basic math. We have a huge problem in Baltimore City. Ignoring it and acting as if it will disappear is not a solution. Treatise after treatise documents the main contributor to juvenile crime is education, or lack thereof. We cannot continue to act as if it's okay to operate the faulty and fraudulent system, all while our children suffer and pay enormous consequences. We must find a way to appoint and elect those who genuinely care about the education of all children. Our children have been traumatized by these actions, and we must find a way to help them, all of them. Parents should not face retaliation for seeking alternative schools and tutoring options. Again, federal and state laws mandate that all children receive fair, free, and appropriate public education. And when the public schools are not equipped to do that, they must allow the schools that can provide our children with the education and environment they need to thrive. Obstructing that should be considered obstruction of justice, and those responsible must be held accountable. This will require stronger policies and regulations for schools and administrators who refuse to provide our children with the education they desperately need. Finally, I hope this work group will consider implementing policies and regulations that further criminalize grade fixing and the refusal of administrators to provide children in special education with the education they need. The first step should include the removal of anyone found doing anything to obstruct, interfere, and outright refuse to provide children in special education with an education. Second, those involved in such practices should face the licensing board. The licensing board should issue a public order stating that the individual was found to have committed fraud fraudulent acts causing harm to our children, and as a result, their license is revoked. Third, mandatory reporting to federal authorities should be implemented. Last week, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney announced the indictment of 4 individuals who engaged in enrollment fraud and grade fixing in a scheme to defraud the Indiana Department of Education of $44.6 million. Thank you for your time and consideration. Our next public guest is Ms. Angelique Vigliotti, and I did check and she is on the call pertaining to work group matters and how it pertains to her county. Ms. Vigliotti?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Maryland Blueprint Work Group. I have been browsing through the Maryland Blueprint, and I have noticed a lack of Frederick County representatives for the workshop. Part of the reason I am here today is because we are a county that has had a large Department of Justice investigation into our special education programs. As someone that has participated in my local Blue Ribbon Task Force and is running for my county Board of Ed, I definitely feel there are many solutions to effectively integrate special education, and one possibility is having a state-mandated training program that is done virtually with training software. This is often done with most HR departments at companies when they are onboarding new employees. If gen ed teachers were to review an interactive video yearly and answer a questionnaire about how to de-escalate the potential for a child in crisis, this type of training could offset the need for additional support. Each time a special educator or aide is removed from their classroom to deal with another crisis, it takes away from the individual support needed to those students in that classroom and reduces those special ed students' instruction time. We also need to understand that the majority of children in the education system, whether special needs or not, have undergone trauma due to the pandemic. These children have been secluded in their homes for educational instruction for almost 2 years. Bringing mental health services into the education system could help alleviate the problems associated with trauma. Licensed social workers could organize social skills groups in each school for kids lacking those abilities. They can help with children's mental health crises that may be interfering with their ability to learn, and it would be helpful for teachers to have someone to bounce off ideas or approach for guidance when they are overwhelmed. There are many untapped resources in our state that we are currently not utilizing in our education programs. In my interactions, even just recently, I spoke with many senior citizens that were talking to me about how they were missing a program in our county that we used to have prior to COVID, in which many retired educators would come in and read to our young elementary school students. In addition, with technology, there are many software programs we could be investing in to track behaviors, help complete IEPs, and even use with students to help their communication skills. As a parent of a child in the special education system, my child has actually told me some of the best instruction he has had was done virtually one-on-one with a home and health teacher. This teacher directly tailored instruction to my child around his needs, and he was more successful learning in this way. We could attract more retired or part-time special educators back to the field if they felt safe and could provide instruction based on each child's accommodations. No matter how the state decides to approach a successful outlook, overall, our approach should be trauma-informed. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, our next item is the ARC Future Discussions with our consultant, Nate Levinson. Nate, the ball is yours.
Hey, great. Good afternoon. Good to see all of you. Nice to be back with you as well. This next topic came out of some of the feedback in the small listening sessions, which we really, again, appreciate everybody who participated. And one of the things, yes? People able to hear me? Great.
Yes.
One of the things we learned from the listening sessions is folks asked for both greater visibility into one of the future topics we're going to discuss, which we have termed the ARC of Future Discussions. We did send that to you. We also know that from the listening groups, some folks wanted to make sure certain topics were in there, and I believe they were. We sent an email for feedback saying, hey, basically, does this make sense? Are these the right topics? We got one response that essentially said we want to make sure we talk about a few topics which are in fact in the ARC. So at this point, based on sharing the ARC of future discussions, which you received prior, and the feedback we received, it's our working assumption that this ARC is appropriate, addresses the topics people want to address, with the footnote, of course, if things change in our evolution as we are having discussions, that the working group feels something else should be added or changed or moved around, we'll certainly have that flexibility. But our sense at this moment is this is a good arc of future discussions, and we were going to proceed with them. So I just wanted to pause for a moment, and if anybody has strong feelings that this is not the appropriate arc for future discussions, please put it into the chat, and we can see whether we want to have the conversation now or gather some more feedback. But our current assumption is that the arc of future discussions seems to meet the needs of most folks, and we won't belabor the issue today. But I definitely want to give folks an opportunity to jump into the chat if we have misinterpreted the feedback. Okay, seeing nothing in the chat, we will move forward to our the key topic of today, which is the discussion of SDI. Thank you, Liz, for putting that in. But so we will let's move on to the next topic, and over to you, Dr. Hickman.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for following up on our past topics. I'm glad to be able to participate in this. My goal for today in the next few little slides is really just to talk about, give a brief overview. I'm going to respond to 3 questions. What does SDI mean in the state of Maryland? What have we told LEAs? And basically, how is this information shared? So I'll start with the second question. You all have you've had opportunity to read on SDI, some short readings, you received additional resources. You will also receive the technical assistance document that was created in 2019. It's sort of my understanding that many of you participated in the development or review of that document. And based on some of the conversations we've had in the past few months, it's something that we need to look at to review and revise the update to include a population of kids, students that we may have missed. There was a robust training on SDI that accompanied the technical assistance bulletin, and the focus on SDI within a multi-tiered system of support continues to guide this technical assistance and professional learning that was issued by the Division of Early Intervention and Special Education Services. That tab 1901 was improving outcomes for students with disabilities, curriculum instruction, and assessment. You can find that the link was shared previously. Ms. Zogby, can you tell me, I can see, oh no, you shared the topics, thank you, in the chat. Moving on, the IEP is, as we know, is the foundation for SDI. So what does it mean? You know, it means in the context of education and special education services, specially designed instruction refers to individually tailoring methods, strategies, materials, and that are provided to meet the unique needs of our students with disabilities. In the state of Maryland, as in many other areas, the term is associated with IDA, or Individual Disabilities Education Act, the federal law that ensures students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. I don't need to tell you that, but just a reminder, so we're laying the groundwork for the future conversations for the day. Specially designed instruction is a key component of the individualized education process, which is a written document developed for each eligible student. What we need to look at is when we're looking at best practices for our IEP teams and the development of those IEPs, because that's where it starts. It's making sure that it's aligned to the academic achievement Aligned to the academic context, the general ed, as we know, that students with disabilities or special ed students are gen ed students first. Therefore, the items and goals in their IEP should be aligned with that content for their early learning progressions. They need to be age appropriate and at age appropriate for their functional skills that may be impacted by their disability that may interfere with and prevent them from communicating, interpersonal interactions, participating in school activities and learning activities. We need to implement evidence-based, research-based, standards-based instructions and strategies and approaches to effectively leading them to desired outcomes. All those things, data is important. Yes, data does matter, and it needs to be reasonably calculated student progress. And we need to develop those goals and things so that we are making reasonable progress for our students and regularly reviewing that. So that in comes the progress monitoring. What we need to do, and we need to do a better job, as Ms. Zarbi mentioned earlier, we looked at the data, we saw that it's not good. What we need to do is consider the information that we see, the information that we know, provide more training opportunities for our staff, our schools, our state, and looking at our parents and school personnel on how to, the best practices for IEP teams. Next slide, please. So the conversations that we've had in the past few months was about what a strong MTSS process is, what a strong multi-tier system support looks like. If our students special students with special needs are gen ed students first, and then their places in the gen ed setting first, we know the data shows that when schools have a strong multi-tier system of support and the foundation is laid for our students with disabilities or diverse needs of our learners, then it's more effective. That effective framework employs evidence-based screenings. It employs is based on universal design for learning, and differentiated instruction serve as the instructional base for all students, including students with disabilities. I just want to repeat that when schools do have a strong multi-tiered system of supports, our students do better, and that helps when they're developing their specially designed instruction. Next slide, please. Over time, you may have seen this pyramid in different ways, but I think that this particular pyramid, this visual here shows you that what a strong multi-tiered system of support looks like. You're starting from the green, moving on to core instruction and making sure that all students are receiving universal screening for the students, formative and summative assessment, DI, and then just looking at different lessons designed with the UDL framework. As those students' needs increase going along the pyramid, the time, the intensity, the explicitness of that increases, and it becomes more individualized, moving through this tier from tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Next slide, please. So as stated, SDI within MTSS, it is the most powerful when delivered with an integrated tiered multiple system of supports. It provides students with disabilities the opportunity for more intensive instruction in areas of skill deficits alongside their peers with similar learning needs. However, a student with disability and unique learning needs stemming from that disability will require specially designed instruction to make progress in the curriculum. If we know that the goal of specially designed instruction is to address the individualized needs of students with disabilities and provide them with meaningful access to education, it takes into account the student's strengths, the weaknesses, their challenges, and it may involve modifications to the curriculum, the teaching methods, or the learning environment to ensure that a student can make progress. But finally, just remember that the implementation of specially designed instruction is an ongoing process that requires collaboration, flexibility, and a commitment to meet the unique needs of each student with a disability. Regular communication and collaboration with the team is also important. So I'll pause there. Actually, I'll stop, because what I share with you, I think that many on this call, and being in the experts in the field that you're in, the navigating the systems that you're in, a lot of things that you know are related to this. A lot of things that we are aware of have been, this evidence base is shown to work. What we need to do is gather and glean from this group and pretty much the state is how do we improve that? How do we get the word out? How do we be more consistent? How do we develop and train our teachers, our educators, our administrators, and our families on the importance of this? So from next slide. So to help us move through this process and based on some of the feedback from you all, I was given 5 minutes to do that. In this 5 minute, just a 5 minute overview, because we want to have a more, I lost my word, engaging, and we want to hear from our experts that are on the panel. Today we have 3 experts who volunteered to speak about SDI from their lens. We have Beth Morton, the principal of Huntingtown High School in Calvert County Public Schools. We have Dr. Erica Levy, educational specialist from Baltimore City Public Schools. And we also have Diane McGowan, Director of Special Design Instruction and Compliance for Anne Arundel County Public Schools and the Department of Education. Mr. Levinson will lead us through this conversation, and we definitely appreciate it. So, Mr. Levinson, you're back on, sir.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Hickman, and thanks for sticking to the 5 minutes. We're really excited to hear from our panelists. The format is we've asked each panelist to take about 5 minutes to share their thoughts on a question we've shared with them in advance. And then we will leave time for the rest of the working group through the chat, to ask questions of the panelists as well. The way we're thinking about this, and you can see it with the first question that we're going to ask Ms. Morton from the perspective of a principal, is we know that the IEP teams, when they sit down to write the IEP, that is where they're determining what specially designed instruction is supposed to be provided to an individual student. So the question from Ms. Morton this afternoon is what expertise is required of the IEP teams to reconcile the individual in the IEP, with also the requirement that there be evidence-based services that are based on peer review. This is making sure that best practices are being written into the IEP to make sure that that's happening to the extent that's practical. So with a key word on practical, that's why we wanted to hear from some folks who are doing this every day. Beth, if you wouldn't mind sharing your insights.
Sure. Hello. Thanks for allowing me to share with the panel. And looking at it from a principal's perspective, and to give you a really brief background of myself, I have been a principal now for, this is year 10, and I was an AP, and I've been an IEP facilitator. But I think what is really important is that I was a special ed and general ed teacher for close to 30 years before I became an administrator. So one thing I really find that is really critical from my perspective as a principal when I'm working with teachers, it's both general and special ed, that they really need to have a good understanding of the content that they're teaching, but they need to have intensive professional development related to research-based interventions. And they need to understand the reasons why specific interventions should be assigned to various learning profiles. So what am I saying with that is that when you're looking at professional development, I think we really need to look at this. It needs to be ongoing. And it's not something that's like a one and done thing, especially when you're bringing in new special ed teachers or even regular special ed teachers. But it has to be intentional also. And when you're looking at an IEP for an individual, a lot of the things that we do and need for kids are really can be applied across different type of learning profiles. So you don't want to think that if you have 5 kids with an IEP in the classroom, within that, you could have one learning strategy that's strong and evidence-based that can be applied to not only all 5 of those students, but even other students in the classroom. So I really just think that I look at PD and training teachers like building a house. Would you build a house on sand? And the answer is no. So if we look at training our teachers and giving them the right training, it's intentional, it's ongoing, and it's research-based, then you are building that foundation on solid concrete as we train our teachers. Because you look at it, it's a commitment. When you are working with a teacher, hopefully it's a good commitment for 20 or 30 years, and you really want it to be solid. So.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Did you have more? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, the only other thing I wanted to say that I think, especially as an administrator, and then I'm saying too, as far as coming from even at the state level, that we really also need to think about not only that intentional professional development and the time teachers have in front of kids and as they write plans, but the amount of time we really give teachers to debrief and talk through things. I think that that's an area where we need to increase. I think teachers need more time to talk, to debrief. And like when you look at a teacher schedule, if they only have a 45-minute planning, I think they need more time, and what that looks, it's gonna, that's kind of the big question, but they do need more time to spend with talking through interventions, understanding them. So that's the only other thing I wanted to share.
Thank you very much. Next question for Dr. Levy, similar, but what's the expertise required by the IEP teams to reconcile again that every student is different? That's the individual. But we have to make sure that they're not just best practices, but that they're reasonably calculated to enable a student to reach their individual goals. This really gets at making sure that these services are potent enough, rigorous enough that it's going to move the students to where we want them to be. And love to hear your thoughts on that question.
Thank you. So I'm a practicing school psychologist as well as educational specialist, been in the field 18 years now. This is year 19. And we know that reasonably calculated comes from the Andrew F. case from 2017. And it states that the children will be able to make progress that's appropriate in light of their circumstances. So not looking at a disability and thinking that this is the limit for this student. I think, first of all, we have to understand what evidence-based interventions are. I know previously people were looking for research-based. However, evidence-based interventions are what we need because we need to show that they work, essentially. I think you go into like What Works Clearinghouse to figure out some interventions, some strategies for kids, and figuring out how it can be applied to your population. I think that's a big thing. As I said, I work in Baltimore City. And so I wouldn't necessarily take an intervention that worked in, say, Oregon and try to apply it to my population. I want to know what works with students that I work with. I think you have to have the expertise in disabilities because you have to know what disabilities look like and what disabilities aren't. I believe Dr. Hickman mentioned, one of the speakers mentioned trauma. And so trauma does not fall under IDEA. However, it can still be considered a disability under 504. So what do the different disabilities look like? How do they present themselves? How do they manifest in the classroom? How do they manifest for this particular student? I think having a understanding of the student is also part of the expertise that you have to have, because not every evidence-based intervention is going to work for every student. You have to understand what the student is capable of. And so when you write your goals for that student, you're going to take all of this stuff into consideration so that your goals are rigorous, your goals are challenging for the student. You don't want to set goals that are, you want to set goals that are reasonable. And so you want to scaffold them so that you can have that student make some great gains during the school year. And I think those are the things that you really have to have expertise in. The interventions, the disabilities that you're working with, how interventions work with certain populations, how the disability manifests in the school, and then having knowledge of the student and also talking to the parent, because the parents are the experts on the student. So getting their information as well, I think is very beneficial for us in writing IEP goals and services.
Great, Dr. Levy, really appreciate that. The last person we're going to hear from before we take some questions from the work group is Ms. McGowan, whose title is perfectly designed for today's discussion as a Director of Specially Designed Instruction and Compliance. So, Ms. McGowan, your thoughts on this question of what is the technical assistance and the support do the IEP teams need to make sure that they understand the IDA requirements, make sure they understand the research base, the effectiveness. What is it that MSDE could provide in the way of technical assistance, and how to provide that technical assistance that will help the IEP teams have the skills and knowledge they need?
Thank you. Looking forward to my 5 minutes. So I'd just like to start out that I am a 30-year special education teacher within the state of Maryland. Anne Arundel County is my third county. I began my career in Baltimore County, then transferred over to Queen Anne County, and hopefully finishing out my career here in Anne Arundel. So I've got to see and experience a variety of different settings, continuum of services. So as I really thought about the question and what technical assistance do IEP teams need, and so we have to reflect on who makes up our IEP teams. We often talk about the focus on special education, but we have to remember that at the heart of specially designed instruction, it's collaborative, it's inclusive of student, parent, teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, related service providers, general education teachers. So we have a broad variety of stakeholders to look at in terms of what types of technical assistance do we need to provide. At the heart of it, I think our technical support should focus on building the capacity and understanding that the responsibility of improving outcomes and the delivery of specially designed instruction must not solely rest on the special education teacher, that it is that of a shared responsibility. And again, I get back to that shared responsibility of all of the team members for whom I started with. I think as it relates to our guidance, we have to look at, first and foremost, what's coming out of Maryland State Department of Education. How is the Department of Special Education and Early Intervention Services, how are they communicating with the other content offices within the State Department? If actions equal expectations, their actions and their collaboration within the various content and other departments at Maryland State should communicate their expectations for how they expect each of the local education agencies to work in terms of what are our expectations? Do we understand? Let me back up a minute. We have been working in Anne Arundel the last 2 years to build a co-teaching academy. One of our most eye-opening kind of sessions has been in preparing for that, has been working with our content offices to design modules that are SDI for the English Language Arts classroom. And through this process, we really discovered how little some of our content coordinators really truly know about specially designed instruction. So I asked the question, what is true of our content experts at the State Department of Education? Because what are they communicating down to their directors within each of the LEAs in terms of the collaborations that they should be encouraging? What is their understanding of specially designed instruction, especially as it relates to inclusive opportunities for our students with some of our most severe cognitive disabilities? Do they actually hold an unwavering belief in the limitless potential of truly every student? I want to reflect on what Josh Schechter pointed out too, and Dr. Hickman pointed out, the key to SDI is our IEP document. But I agree with what Josh commented about, is that increasing our level of documentation and the documentation required is not going to make us deliver better specially designed instruction to our students with disabilities. It gets back to also what Ms. Morton just said, as well as what Dr. Levy said, time. Time is very critical. We have very limited time during the school days to really be able to collaborate and provide professional development. I know one of the caveats that my superintendent, Dr. Bedell, is trying to get our state legislature to have some flexibility in how our school year looks, to be able to create potentially some flexibility to build in more professional development time. I think MSDE has the opportunity now to be a leader in creating a system-wide professional development system similar to what Pennsylvania has in their PTAN, or what Virginia has in TTAC, in creating these systemic professional developments where we have shared resources that we can take back to our LEAs and differentiate based to our own needs, but it is a standard message across the system. For years, they have been trying to work on developing micro-credentials for IEP chairs. So taking something like that and elevating it, maybe not limiting just to IEP chairs, but to any IEP team member, what do they need to know to really be able to meaningfully participate in that IEP process? Lastly, I think just to say is that I think we are poised right now, and I'm really glad to be here as part of the blueprint, because we have the ability to really design the world we want to see, one that is meaningfully inclusive for everyone within Maryland Public Schools.
Thank you very, very much. I thought very insightful. I really just appreciated the comment, the connection between perhaps needing more time to plan and finding that time by, and I see it in the chat as well, by freeing up and streamlining, I guess, the IEP process. It's not the length of the document, it's how insightful and on the target what's in the document. And I see that in the chat, and I really appreciated hearing that from you, Diane. At this point, I would love to give the opportunity to all the other work group members to ask questions of our three panelists. And then again, we will have a conversation in small groups amongst ourselves. But if folks would go to the chat, I know there's been some activity already in the chat. But what we'd love to hear some questions that folks have from the working group. So I'm seeing one question or a comment that really appreciate that. Until we have a unified process and consistency across the state, this will be very difficult. Even in a district, IEP teams can run very differently. So I'd love to throw to any one of our three panelists your thoughts on what's a practical way to bring greater consistency to the IEP process and what's going into the IEPs.
I'll go ahead and boldly unmute first. I will say a great step was years ago when Maryland became one of the first states, and I think maybe still the only state to have a statewide IEP. I think that brought a huge level of consistency across our jurisdictions, especially our jurisdictions that often share students back and forth multiple times in a year. It brought that level of consistency. I think where we get into IDEA and COMAR build our foundation for the what of the process. Where we, I think, get into the difficulty with consistency at times is the how, which gets into, again, that idea of looking at staffing and the capability of being able to staff certain positions. So for example, you have some school systems that have assistant principals that act as IEP chairs. You have other school systems that have IEP chairs. But then, for example, when I came from Queen Anne County, many of our elementary schools did not have assistant principals. We did not have IEP facilitators. So our special education teachers were also facilitating the IEP meetings. And so I think that's where you get some inconsistencies with the resource allocation between the different jurisdictions.
Great, appreciate that. I'm also seeing in the chat that not every district is using
Maryland Online IEP.
yes, thank you.
One of the things I wanted to share that Calvert County does also is, and I agree with the sentiments as far as having the Maryland Online IEP. And I've been through this. I've been working in Maryland for close to 30 years, and I've seen just the positive change that having a statewide IEP has brought to our work. So I share that sentiment. But one of the things we do in Calvert County, our online platform is Schoology, which is similar to Blackboard or Brightspace, anything that counties use. We've created a Schoology course for SDI, and that course is open for teachers, special ed teachers, general ed teachers, administrators. So that has helped as far as helping to train more staff in the area of SDI.
Great, thank you. I know we've had a lot of good conversation also going on in the chat, so I'd encourage folks to take a look at it. I don't want to read all of it, and some of it's more of a dialogue than questions for our panelists, but definitely very, very insightful. I think
I did notice someone mention, and I just saw it really quickly, nobody wants 60-page IEPs and endless documentation requirements. And I think if there's a way that we can teach people what meaningful information needs to go into the IEP, as opposed to, making the IEPs longer, if we can make them, if we can condense the information, keep the pertinent information in the IEPs, and use that information to create our goals. And I do like the fact that now we all have the same framework for goals as well. Because that was an issue that I could see coming from students coming from different counties. When they would come into Baltimore City, we had to figure out what the goal actually meant. But now that we all have the same framework, I think that's worked out a lot better. But I think talking to the special educators, Ms. McGowan mentioned micro-credentialing, but having people understand what is supposed to go into an IEP and what does not need to be an IEP. Remember that this is focused on this child. It's focused on the child making this kind of growth in these academic areas. And that's the information that we need to put in there, as opposed to writing these, like I said, 60-page IEPs, and you have to go through and figure out, well, what's relevant and what, doesn't help me write a goal for this student or identify if this kid is making progress or not.
I see a few questions and discussions. Again, Erica, thank you for that. I see a few questions and discussions in the chat about wanting to ensure that students are making significant progress and are working towards grade level mastery, but also this question of how do you reconcile that? And the example given in the chat is a student in 5th grade reading on a kindergarten level. They're not yet decoding. How does one think about, how does one reconcile that, and whether there's, and I'm curious to our panelists, your sense in the school systems you're working, is there a good common shared understanding of what to do in that particular situation, the situation of starting significantly below grade level, and obviously a goal to bring to grade level?
So I will say within Anne Arundel County, we are a work in progress. We are finally getting on board with the science of reading, and moving in that direction. So trying to help our general education teachers understand how to close that gap. Again, it's that idea of using common and consistent language, being intentional, and also understanding that teaching to the middle is not working either. We really have to provide that specially designed instruction to address those individual needs that come as a result of the student's disability. But then we also have to remember that every student has a strength, and we have to focus in on that strength and how do we capitalize on that strength to also help close and shrink those differentials. I think it gets into one of the comments about what are we doing with our pre-service teachers, and a thought I had as I was scrolling through is that does MSDE and does Maryland need to reconsider the need to have more than 1 3-credit class for special education to become a certified teacher? Do we need to require some additional credentialing for our pre-service teachers to understand and really be able to work with our students with disabilities?
And I was going to add to that I like what you said as far as understanding the science behind reading. And it's also building that mindset that even though a student may be reading below grade level, they still can think and understand at grade level or above. So they have to be able to have access to on grade level content. And then back to what I said at the beginning, as far as, and this does go back to ongoing professional development, like I talked about, but just to understand understand the intervention that may be needed for that, but understand the why behind that intervention, not just to put a student in a reading intervention as one size fits all, but to really understand what is the why behind that intervention, what is it going to address and help with that particular student. And again, it also comes into how do you build that into a child's school day, because what happens often is they end up missing out on something, maybe even something fun or enriching, and that's not what you want. You don't want a kid to miss out on enrichment activities to address, their deficit in reading, and that really can impact the students, just how a student feels about themselves. So it's really a delicate balance that we constantly have to be looking at.
Great, thanks. I'm also noticing a lot of discussion, very fruitful discussion going on in the chat. So I think it would be maybe good to let transition to a format where we can have conversations with each other, obviously in smaller groups. So if we could go to the next slide, we will just talk a bit about how we want the small group, how we want the small groups to work. We're going to put you into small groups. This is, again, very much based on your feedback.
One more slide, please.
Oh, thank you. Perfect, thanks. We will move you there. Hopefully you will see the click to move. If you receive a notification, accept it. We're going to give you about 35 minutes in the chat. So in the small group, so definitely plenty of time to talk. We're going to have an MSDE staff member there as a note taker, just to capture the highlights of the discussion so that we can share those out with you in the near future. And would also like for each group to select somebody as a facilitator, somebody as a timekeeper, and one brave soul to be a reporter to take some high-level notes, not a transcription, but we're going to ask each of the groups to spend 2 to 3 minutes when we come back as a large group to share the highlights of your discussion. And you have the discussion questions. We had shared them. We want to go to the next slide. We've got some norms. Sorry, I should have. I know all of us care deeply. We want to make sure we are speaking with care, using I statements. We would definitely want to listen respectfully. We want to give our input and at the same time make space for others. I know we're all really passionate about this and we all want to contribute to this. The discussion questions, next slide. The guiding question that we shared and these more detailed discussion questions, it's what evidence-based instruction will make the biggest impact? What are the skills and that the IEP team's going to need? How do we integrate this into RTI? How do we make sure that the specially designed instruction is designed to get that meaningful growth and get students to grade level mastery? And more, or as importantly, if we can keep the conversation really focusing on what can MSDE do, what can school districts do, what can higher ed do, what can folks do to make this better? I think we're all pretty familiar with a lot of the challenges we're seeing. And we're hoping that the working group can really, and I think they already have, to talk about what are the solutions to these problems. With that, Carmen or Dr. Hickman or Liz, anything else folks want to share as a setup for the small group discussions?
Carmen may have something else, but I'd like to say, just to follow up what you said, as you go into these breakout sessions, recognize there are 7 questions. We have 35, 40 minutes to talk. We need to transition to those groups and transition back out. But our team is prepared to do that. I just think that you monitor your airtime, and being that we're in small groups, the request was to make sure your camera is on and that you're engaged in the conversation. So, Carmen, you have anything else to add that I leave out? You want to tell us what you're expecting?
Just please know that those breakout sessions will be recorded. The MSDE staff who is functioning as a note taker will also record. We're also asking that MSDE staff copy and paste the questions as you get to them so that they are fresh in your mind, and because also we understand that they are rather long. So if someone forgets to do that, please just speak up and give a reminder. And with that, I think we will have Dylan break us into groups.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carmen. Please stand by. You should be automatically moved to the proper breakout room you've been assigned to. And then we'll follow up with anyone that's maybe stuck in limbo and get you into the right room. So please stand by. Activating now. And so I should also mention for our breakout room 1 assignees, you will actually stay in this main room. It's effectively a breakout room, but we're going to keep that group here. So you should all be available now.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Dylan. Hello, everyone. I'll be your note taker here, and I would just like us to determine who's going to be our facilitator and who is going to be our timekeeper here before we start.
I'll do this. I'll help with the timekeeping. Ms. Owolabi, who's speaking now, you'll be the note taker. Ms. Zogby, you going to assign someone, or you going to facilitate?
No. Someone else should probably facilitate and report out. So who would like to, right, are those 2 different people? The facilitator?
Yes, they're different people.
Okay, so we need a reporter outer and a facilitator.
reporter outer.
And I'll call on someone if you don't raise
I'll
your.
report out.
Okay,
Alright.
thanks.
Cindy.
Thanks,
Thank
Kendi.
you.
Hi.
Anderson.
Hi, and who's going to facilitate? Renee, you want to do that? I only called on you because
Sure.
you're someone I
Sure.
know, but
I'll
okay.
be happy
Okay.
to.
All right. So
right.
our facilitator is Kendi
Yes.
Henderson.
And
Thank you.
he's going to be the reporter outer, right? And Renee is
I'll report out.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
All right. Are we all good with our
I think
roles?
good. We're gonna see. I think that so I put the question in the chat. Do you see it, or did I put it in the wrong place?
Nope, we see it.
All right, fantastic.
That's great. All right. So we have 35 minutes. Is that right, Dr. Hickman, Liz?
Mhm.
Yes, I think we'll get a
Yep.
warning. So let's try.
Yep.
It's 5:05 now. Let's try to get to 5:30 and see what we have. Okay, go.
All right, no pressure there. All right. Question one that Dr. Hickman put in the chat. And just because I believe in multiple learning styles, some folks are auditory. So question one, do IEP teams generally understand the requirements under IDEA that IEPs must provide evidence-based, specially designed instruction, SDI, as part of services that are reasonably calculated to enable each student's goals to be achieved? And I think this is a small enough group that maybe folks won't talk over each other, so we don't need to use the raise hand feature. But if folks don't feel like they're getting heard, we can obviously move to the raise hand feature.
Mhm.
So
Hi, I'm
thoughts?
Betsy Perry. I'm from Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm a 30-year, could retire in July special ed teacher, national board certified. And I think Montgomery County does a really good job of this particular question. I think that, we're supposed to use standards based for writing IEP goals. The ambiguous part comes, like I said in my comment in the chat, that depending on if we're having a training, some of the facilitators might say to craft the IEP goals one way, and then another trainer the next year or a different meeting will say to craft it another way. So I think the main key here is consistency. We know that SDI is coming. It just hasn't been really discussed a lot, but we definitely need to make sure that everybody's on the same page, including the general education teachers. We need to get away from thinking that parts of the IEP fall on the special educator. And another part is we're a team, and that includes the parents, making sure parents are trained as well. I'm in a Title I school with mostly non-native speakers. And so, we have to do a lot of explaining, and we want to make sure our parents feel welcome. And every meeting I am in, I say, you are part of the team. We don't make any decisions without your input and ensuring, because they know their child best. So my key takeaways are we need to have consistency, professional development, and one of the issues over the years is that there's a new thing, right? The shiny ball, and then next year it's something else. So I'm a firm believer in STI. So I think if this is the route we're going, if we want consistency, it needs to keep going every year. You can't just like sprinkle it. It has to be full-fledged. For example, science or reading is really big in Montgomery County. So like there's lots of trainings, and many, many different teachers can get professional development, get certifications. I have like 4 different reading programs I've been certified to teach, but it needs to be consistent. So the key words are consistency, professional development, and everyone who's involved with that student needs to be on the same page.
Thank you, Betsy. And as a facilitator, I'm not above calling on people because I made a list of names to make sure that everybody gets a voice heard.
So I will jump in because I'm afraid you're going to call on me now.
I would, Debbie.
So I would say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that is something that would be important to find out. And I guess my question is, how do we gather that data? I mean, I don't know what the IEP teams in all of the jurisdictions know. I do know that when I look at IEPs, I see what I think are very different levels of understanding and very different resources available to address an individual child's needs. But I guess that's my question to MSDE, maybe not for you right now, Dr. Hickman, but to say.
I'm prepared to turn it back to you, to not take it. I'm going to ask you to can you answer the first part of the question? Not in the same, because I want to be able to give a response, but do IEP teams generally understand the requirement under IDA that IEPs must provide evidence-based, specially designed instruction? Let's stop there.
And I would have to say, I don't know, because although the goals are individualized, when it comes to services, all I see as a healthcare provider is that this child is getting, an hour and a half a week of special education services divided between math and reading. And I have no idea, it doesn't say on the IEP, what methods of instruction are being used. So I don't know how to answer that.
I would just say, I agree with Debbie with not necessarily knowing. I believe they understand that's what it should be. But then I think practice is always different from theory. And depending on the age of your IEP team, and I'm saying that in terms of how many times have they done it? How long have they been doing it? Do they really get it and understand the real thing behind the evidence-based practices and how to use them and put it in an IEP, which then also coincides with the child's disability. And so when you're doing that, do they really all understand that? There are some who do, who may have been doing this for a while, but the newer ones, I don't know that they know how to really put it into true practice. I think they are aware that it is the practice, that it should be, but how to actually implement it becomes a different thing.
Thank you, Imani. She was also worried I was going to call on her. Others. Kindy?
Hi. I would say that, and just by way of background, I'm the director of special ed. So when I look longitudinally at my county, I think that there are places where we do this extraordinarily well, and there are places where some minor adjustments get us where we need to be, and then there are places where clearly we're struggling. I think it has to do with the transition of staff members, either through internal transfers or as people are retiring. The reality of hiring new special educators is oftentimes their second career, and they don't have the pedagogy. And so we've been talking a lot about what do you have to do before the first day so that we kind of set the stage so that there's a fundamental benchmark, and then how do we build upon it? And then Beth is from my county. She was speaking earlier. We went really deeply into SDIs through our Schoology course, and it's 3 modules. It's very flexible, but that allows principals to decide where they are on the continuum. So if you're people are doing a pretty good job with SDI and understanding the research-based component, they can just pick certain sections to highlight versus a principal that had a lot of turnover that year and they have a really inexperienced staff. And then they can start foundationally and build from there. But it's so flexible. And we started with special educators, and now we're some of the principals were insightful enough to say everybody's getting it at one time. But we also are now making sure that all general ed teachers have it as well. So it's been really a foundational piece for us, and it gave us a common language to discuss our needs.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hickman. I just looked down at the time and was like, oh my goodness gracious. So folks, please, if you have comments to question 1, put them in the chat because my understanding is the MSDE folks are going to be copying the chat, right, Dr. Hickman? Thank you. I
Copy
love
and
that.
pasting everything, yes.
All right. Super. Thank you. All right. Question 2 to the group. What are evidence-based services that are based on peer review research to the extent practicable? Oh, that's a word.
I might be practicable. I think it's practicable.
Practicable. Thank you. It's after 5 o'clock. All right. And so this is a really loaded one. What expertise is required of IEP teams to reconcile the I in IEP with the requirement for evidence-based services that are based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable? And basically, what are general guidelines for teachers' judgment in consideration of appropriate evidence-based instruction? Thoughts?
Hi, Renee. I'll start on this one.
Thanks, Dee.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Thank you. So I have a concern with the second part of it, with the expertise. I know recently, I guess ongoing with our county, I'm in Charles County, shortage of special education teachers. There was recently recruitment for special educators this past summer, and the requirement is just a basic bachelor's degree to come in. And my understanding is that they have 2-3 years to get certified as a teacher, and then the special education training is optional. While it is encouraged, it is optional. And in meetings, I guess, in the Developmental Disabilities Council, as well as our local CCAC, and several other things in the county. So this is inside, not hearsay. And my understanding is that they just want to get people in the door. And I'm also a parent of a transitioned out, a 22-year-old with autism and an intellectual disability. And I have been at the table when the IEP team has shifted. We've had the same facilitator, but his therapist would be someone from the county because of a scheduling conflict. The vice principal would sit in because a teacher couldn't come. His counselor couldn't come. And so there are lots of substitutes in the meeting that were unaware. I can say they are aware, but they can't really give any professional guidance. They're just basically sitting in the meeting. So when we're talking about the expertise required, my understanding is that putting that requirement on will, I guess, lessen the pool of people that are available. I personally think it should be just as you would any other highly degreed profession, but that's a challenge in our county of just getting people in.
Thank you, Dee.
So I don't know if that
Hi, Sharon,
addresses
County.
that second one.
Do you mind sharing?
I'm
what
sorry.
county?
Oh,
No,
I said
Sharon,
Charles.
you did. I'm sorry, I missed it. Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm
Charles
in
County.
Charles County. We'll work with them. I want to tell you what note I wrote, if you don't mind. There have been lots of untrained, uninformed, and substantially inexperienced people in IEP team meetings. And you think that part of it is due to training being voluntary?
But I also heard inexperienced. Yeah. I'm sorry, Dee.
Yeah, so just to give you, I guess, hardcore information, there was a flyer put out seeking special educators, and the minimum requirement was a bachelor degree coming in. And so that was to get people in the door. And as the vice chair for our CCAC, we meet directly with the director of special education who is doing the interviews. And I brought this up as a concern about certifications. And she said that teachers have 2 to 3 years to get certified. Number one is a teacher. And then when we talk about specialized training, because there is a problem with the information, I guess, coming top down from the director of special education to the facilitators, from the facilitators to the director of compliance to the parents. And she said that she was going to offer training throughout the summer, but offering it and requiring it are two different things. And so my understanding is that you cannot require it, even if it is offered. So when we talk about the expertise that's required, I'm guessing that they would need to come in with this level of expertise simply because you can't force it after the fact. That is my understanding. Did that
Can
answer
I
your question?
It answered my question. I don't want you to walk away with that though. I mean, I think,
Can
and I know we
I
don't
figured
have
it's
time.
not.
Kennedy,
Mhm.
were you gonna
I
respond?
can I think I can give some insight into that. And I work really closely with your director, so I will never speak for her, but I think I have a little insight. So we're all in the same boat with teachers coming in with a bachelor degree, but we're working through innovating programs to get them certified, and we're actually trying to get them into master's level programs for special ed. So we have a partnership directly with Bowie State, but we also work with many other providers. It's not that we're trying to corner the market, but in our county, sometimes availability and location is a struggle. So I can tell you that Charles County is involved in all of those efforts. And I think the misunderstanding around requirement, summer training, most often we can't require because of contract language. But during the course of the workday, the school year, and our PD days, we require training on those days. And so some of our struggle is how do you get those days before the kids are there to train? And we're trying to work on innovative ways to do that in the hiring process. So I think there might have been some misunderstanding
No,
there.
she did mention that, but I think the bigger concern is in the meantime, while
Oh, I
all of
agree.
those things are happening, the students still need, we're still talking about the level of expertise right now. And we're
Right.
still talking about IEP meetings. We have students on home and hospital. So it's just the meantime where it creates the issue. Like it sounds great, long term, short term. So she did communicate all of that, but the bigger conversation is, well, what's happening now?
Well, and I think what D is that is a snapshot of everything that families are experiencing with their frustration with their IEP teams and processes with that. So I'm trying to be mindful of time. So any other comments before we move
No,
into
ma'am.
question 3?
I'm sorry, you don't have time for that. You need to go to question 3.
Oh.
He's a good timekeeper. He keeps us.
He is really on it. And
Did you see
I
my
hate this because I can't chime in as the
did you see my
facilitator. So
did you see my apology for correcting you on practicable? I made a word
oh
up.
no, but that's all right. People correct me
You're
all
right.
the time.
It's in there.
All right, 3. What is the meaning of reasonably calculated? Again, what expertise is required of IEP teams to reconcile the I in IEP with the requirement that evidence-based services be reasonably calculated and able to each student's goals to be achieved?
And I'm going to chime in super quickly just to say
Please.
I am really interested in what folks have to say about this. I had an IP meeting for my daughter this morning, and at the end of it, talked to my team that is an amazing team and said, this is one of the things we're going to be talking about. And these two long-term special educators in Baltimore City both looked at me and they said, I wish somebody would tell me how to reasonably calculate services.
Yes.
I think that it is a huge problem, and it tends to default to what we do here, what our staffing will allow here, and how to get out of that cycle, I think is really key to what we're doing here, is to say, if we really are trying to do something individualized, what does that look like? And then how do we solve for the staffing to make it possible? But I think what happens is people of best intention and at making their best effort have to write services that they know they can actually provide. And that's, that while it's understandable, that's not what the law says, and it's not what we're supposed to be doing. And I think one of the impacts of that is that families that advocate very hard get more. and
Mhm.
and other families don't. And in a place like Baltimore City that is already, having so many disparities
Mhm.
in so many life outcomes, we know that that's one of the things that happens. So anyway, just wanted to sort of lay that as a little bit of a groundwork for this conversation.
Well, and I appreciate that, Liz, because the piece I want to piggyback on that is the fact that, so as the Parents Place of Maryland, we see IEPs all the time. And for us, we know for us, reasonably calculated means they should be making adequate, if not narrowing the achievement gap. And what we end up seeing is IEPs that have the same goals year after year after year after year until we work with families to say, no, this is how you collect data and you map it. Now, again, families only call us because things aren't working well. So I will preface that statement. So I do think that this is a very powerful question for folks.
Mhm.
I think that part of what the reasonably calculated formula would be is also looking again at the actual diagnosis. And even though it's ADHD or autism or whatever, and for each child, because that's that I in there, that still manifests differently in the level and time it takes for them to get that. And if you have a classroom with up to 4 grade levels in an LREC room, you're still not going to get that child to get but so far. In an LREA room, when you put that child, they get their special education services, and then they might have to get the rest of it from a general education classroom setting to help them move along with whatever that skill is. Most general education teachers are not even touching the IEP in that real way. At least when my child was in school, I pulled them out and homeschooled them. I'm in Baltimore City because I never said that. And I work with a lot of early learners. So I have a child care center who with an inclusion setting. So I have IFSBs that turn into IEPs and the like. And I literally see that it's hard for people to figure out, well, how much time does it really take to get this child to get this particular skill? And they scaffold things, but then if you're only doing something 30 minutes once a week and you expect to see a gap close for most children with most types of intellectual disability, you're not going to get that. You're not going to close the gap. You'll see it die. And I don't know what the formula should be, but I know that we need to really look at what it takes for the average person to learn a skill, and then maybe take time and see how much longer it may. I know for my son, what you might teach a student, and my son has Down syndrome, what you might teach for a student that does not have Down syndrome, I knew how long it took for him to finally get a skill. I could tell you, you can't just do 30 minutes once a week to get that skill and begin to push it out. But was the school willing to do it? Because sometimes, as I think somebody put it in there, when you look at the time and availability of the school, a lot of times it's more what the school can do versus what the student needs. And that becomes the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Amani. So not to call people on, but I want to make sure everybody's voice got heard. So Rachel, I haven't heard from you or Lisa, and I'm not even, is it pronounced Stalia? I wasn't sure. So I just wanted to give you all an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I don't mind being called on. I was particularly in agreement with all of you, but Liz's comment to open up the conversation just has stuck with me. I have to be honest, I don't know if I have seen an IEP session happen that really did truly center the needs, goals, and abilities of the student, as Dee put in the chat, versus the budget, the staffing, and the time. So does anyone have an example of how their particular district or maybe with their own child, how that conversation has gone and how the school has navigated that conversation?
I just added to this additional comment to say, when there was a time when my daughter didn't meet a goal, my reaction to back to my team, and I think it probably made sense to me at the time, it makes more sense to me now, is, well, what part do we recalculate? Do we recalculate how much time, how frequent, the ratio of teacher to student? and in order to accelerate that progress, because she was making, it wasn't that the intervention wasn't working, she was making progress, but not at the rate that we expected her to make. And so we ended up adding 2 individual, one-on-one sessions each week with the provider to push her progress, to accelerate that progress. But I think that that's not what happens. I think that often what ends up happening is we lower our expectation about the rate of progress rather than saying we didn't actually reasonably calculate in order to make the progress that we believe that the child has the potential to make, because we had a small group that was 10 students or 8 students.
I just want to jump in and piggyback on the last comment. That's true. So I'll be quick. I had one of my 4th grade students last year was not making progress in the reading intervention I was doing with her. The prescribed was 3 students. I asked my administration and reading specialist if I could think outside the box. So I had to think outside the box and do a combination of 2 different interventions and bring it down to a level, like a kindergarten level. And I met with her one-to-one for 15 minutes, but that was only because I had time to do that. And that's when I saw a breakthrough after 2 months of her getting that consistent support, right? To the point where she is decoding this year in 5th grade. She's still well below grade level, but because I did that intensive prescribed, that was one of the few times in my career that a student really got individualized. So whenever we're having these discussions, especially with parents and other stakeholders, people have to understand the staffing is real. We have permanent subs in our schools. So I know we're trying to focus on what is ideal, but then we also need to make sure that people understand what's happening in the schools in terms of staffing. So like my schedule this year won't allow me to work one-on-one with a student for 15 minutes because I'm, running groups and supporting in the classroom. So we need to look at the whole picture when we're talking about ways to support students in those ways.
Thank you, Betsy. And the thing of it is that rubs up against the requirement of IDEA, right? Because IDEA says lack of resources is not a reason for services not to be provided, but it is a reality, right? So
and we can live in this space of shortage, but also acknowledge that we are not powerless as a state to come up with solutions to those shortages. And when we throw our hands up and say, well, we have a shortage, and I think that we're kind of in that space right now where there's a feeling of there's nothing we can do about it. And yet resources and programs, there are things that can be done, and there's ideas out there about how states are doing this and doing it better than we are. And I think we need to tap into some of those solutions.
Absolutely. And so I was going to say, yes, I know you said we have, 9 minutes left?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Do question 4, please.
Question 4. Okay. This is about technical assistance. What knowledge and skills should be included, and how should the TA be structured and delivered? Will IEP teams need to respond to the above requirements?
So I have a question. When you're saying technical assistance, are you saying the technical assistance and supports that a student needs, like tools to access curriculum and instruction, or technical assistance in terms of tools that the IEP team needs to access MOIEP and supports and of the like? Which one are we talking about?
The latter.
The latter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the question isn't worded in a way because IEP teams do have to respond to the above requirements. So if the question is written a little funky, you're right, Betsy.
Well, Montgomery County has a special group called Councils on Teaching and Learning. I'm the special ed rep for elementary. So we're the pulse for meet once a month and then push out discussions, information around curriculum instruction to all the special ed teachers in elementary. Technology in terms of special ed with MOIEP, to me, is not a big, heavy lift. We would actually like more streamlined technology to help with some of the paperwork. It's not so much that we need assistance or professional development. Once you're on MOIP and you're rocking and rolling and you got familiar with it, You learn your shortcuts, you learn your ways to be able to, maneuver through the system. I will say, because I'm on this work group for the first time, I did open up tabs I've never ever opened before. So one piece that would be beneficial is like the report running and those things on the other tabs that don't get utilized. I would say that would be an area because that's something that we just don't use a lot. But it's more in terms of making some of the forms more friendlier and other parts that go along with the IEP process more streamlined.
Thank you, Betsy.
Can I just add one quick thing?
Sure, of course,
Okay.
Lonnie.
Just kind of in a general sense, we went to I went to DC with another group, with the Down syndrome group, with this. Literally, special education is underfunded by $300 billion. And that could help a whole lot of our shortcomings, right? You could have more staffing, you could have the resources, you could hire more teachers, you can hire the things that we need. So ultimately, in order to try to help that, and not just the state of Maryland, but across everywhere, like, we have to also find ways that we use our voices to go and ask them to make that a priority. But literally, the number that was given to me by a staffer was $300 billion shortfall in funding for special education. And so unless we change that, school systems and districts will struggle because the funding is not there and they can't match it on their own. There are no taxes that come and help swoop in and say, yeah, we're going to give this right to special education. It's not happening. If it did happen, that would help, but it still doesn't solve it. And we have a whole government that needs to help support and back this whole thing. I don't know where that can go with anything.
That's historical.
There's nights in the nap. We have those nights in the nap. Let's get in there with our people and like have them fuss with the Senate at the higher level. Like, it's just a hard thing.
Yeah, it is very difficult and has been since 1975. So 74, 75. So yeah, you're right, Amani. All right, question 5, because Dr. Hickman is ruthless. How should SDI be integrated into RTI? And you have 4 minutes.
I'm sorry, Renee. I don't mean to be ruthless. I personally need to know the answer to number 6.
And well, see, that's what I was trying to do, is what question was the most important. So what is 6?
Okay,
all right, let's do 6. What is current MSDE guidance in effect? Menus of evidence-based practices on evidence-based best instructional practices associated with particular disabilities. Are there priorities for where such guidance is required? I would say A, all of the above.
Okay, thank you.
But I will let others chime in. And I think that was actually brought up, Liz, in a work group meeting that Dr. Wright brought up around drop downs and examples. But Dr. Hickman, I wasn't sure if you were here yet or not, so I apologize.
No problem, but I've been hearing it, so I'll leave it. The reason why I've been hearing it, I know that's a concern. It's some guidance that we need to work on. We have a few tabs, but it's not touching on it. And it would be a really great thing to have instruction based on disability. And I'm going to respond that we're going to work on, that's a huge lift, but what we need to do first is work on content and work with our content experts to do so. But this is important too.
It is, but the caution is, just because one child has ADD and another child has ADD, it's still not the same. Same thing with LD and reading, same thing with LD, right? So
that would be my argument about not the disability. What about just the strength and the weaknesses of the students in math, reading, social studies, science, PE, art, music?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I'm going to jump on my UDL soapbox, which is, I just feel like the more we implement UDL and right, it limits the amount of differentiation that we need to do.
Liz, they're gonna automatically cut us off, so don't think it's me. So keep talking. No,
she's right.
I'm done. UDL.
Yeah. No, she's right. UDL and differentiated instruction. If we do those, hopefully we don't need as much SDI. So
And more training for the general ed teachers.
Thank you.
Because
Yes.
I'm one person. I can't be with that student all day long. The parent can't. The child is going to have to be in the general ed setting at some portion of the day with just a teacher. They need to be following through on those best practices.
But we need to support them, Betsy, right? We need to stop dumping kids with IEPs and general education and not supporting our gen ed teachers. They've got to be
And
supported.
look at class sizes, because if they have 25, 30 students, and you have these special education students with IEPs, you cannot help them in the way that it is intended, which is why I put my kid.
Yep,
I was like,
absolutely.
I
All right,
was
there
that
you go.
parent that was able to go.
We've solved the problems, Dr. Hickman. So just put us in charge, this group.
I got you.
All right. And we've got 1 minute to spare.
They're just going to just bring us back soon.
So we got all of them but 2.
I know, and they were like pretty I didn't like them anyway. So
yeah. It's like, how do you integrate SDI into RTI in 35 minutes?
I do want to have more conversation about the primary and secondary providers, because I think that is done very differently in other states than we do.
Yes.
There are states that say general education teachers cannot provide specially designed instruction, and that is not what we say in the state of Maryland.
No.
So I think there, we might need to have some conversation about that.
No, we absolutely, Liz, because some of the best specially designed instruction that my daughters ever got, both my daughters have disabilities, was from general education teachers. So with support from a special education teacher, a highly qualified special education teacher. So yes, we do need to have more conversations about it. Absolutely.
And also the way that funding follows that primary and secondary provider, because I think that often leads to under-resourced schools, because IEP teams don't understand the way funding can be tied to service hours and primary and secondary providers. And that's, those processes are, I mean, forgive me for saying this, at least in Baltimore City, it is purposefully kept opaque, so that you cannot understand what the implications are going to be for your special education funding in your program.
Yeah, and I don't know where braiding became such a scary word, because braiding is can be such a huge asset when we're wanting to support our kids. So yeah.
Well, we're not going to get bumped. We're going to have everyone come back and join us.
Oh, there you go. Here I was waiting.
Okay.
I was waiting for the pullback.
Kendi,
Kendi, good luck reporting. Right, Kendi, you're reporting out. You're good, right?
I got it. I'm good.
Yay.
Look, I took notes.
Thank you, Kendi.
Sure.
So they're coming back now, looks like. Great job, Renee. Thank you.
You are welcome.
I wish Brian could finish his thought. He was making a good point and we got cut off.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope folks had a constructive and insightful conversation. I also hope people had a chance to feel heard and be heard. Certainly, the small group I was in, great conversation. The guiding questions really helped drive the discussion, and some really interesting recommendations and analysis of the situation came out. So at least on a sample of one, we had a very good conversation. So what I'd love to do now is to call upon those brave souls who offered to report out, and trying to keep it to again, roughly 3 or so minutes, the highlights of your discussion. And I'm hoping folks know that there was a group number that passed before them as they were moved into the rooms. And Carmen, a quick question for you. How many did we have?
Sorry, we have 5 breakout groups.
Great.
So if people could mute themselves until they provide those updates, that would be really helpful. There are a couple people who are still unmuted, unmuted. Thanks.
Great. So with that, I would love to hear from the spokesperson for Group 1.
I think that's me. I'm Kendi Anderson from Calvert County. So to summarize our conversation, we talked about under question 1, the standards-based IEP goals, and that we're getting differing messages as trainers change, and that we need to really make sure that information about SDI, that everybody's on the same page, including general ed. We talked about the shortage of special ed teachers and the concerns that that creates across all, almost all of the questions, and concerns around that gap in time when second career folks or people without the pedagogy come into our system, and what happens in that time till they're trained up and their effectiveness increases along with that training. And we had a really long conversation about reasonably calculated, and nobody seemed to have a clear idea or understanding around how that formula should be and the calculation overall. And that we really need to get to the center of the conversation being the child and their specific needs, and then how do we wrap those services around. And then I think, kind of in summary at the very end, when we exhausted our efforts talking about additional training, we went to the underfunded mandates and how can we use our voices to leverage additional resources to put towards our students. I hope I did a good job for group one.
Great, thank you very much. And it does seem like a very thoughtful and substantive conversation. Group two.
That would be me by default. I think similarly to some of what Kenny shared, we had a lot of good discussion. We really had a lot of discussion through multiple questions about evidence-based and research-based practices, and how really there is little understanding of that at a higher level, but also definitely down at the IEP level, to what does that really look like when it comes down to the I in IEP for students. We looked at differing factors that go into that. Some of it is about resources and what resources systems have, not only just material resources, but also in terms of personnel resources and who those personnel are available to deliver those resources. We got into that discussion when we were looking at question 7 into who can deliver SDI, and that there's a lot of variability in who is providing those services. And oftentimes it can go into the training behind that individual as to who should be best determined to deliver that specially designed instruction. Overall, we thought that some of the technical assistance and support from MSDE should be able to be more accessible and be made available on a more on-demand basis to stakeholders from across the state who, like me, at 1 o'clock in the morning, like to be up watching, videos, as opposed to trying to find time during your planning time during the day. But also being able to bring more specificity to some of the technical assistance bulletins that make it more applicable to that teacher in that 2nd grade classroom or in that sixth grade classroom. So again, that creating of a library of resources, menus, something that is going to be ease of access and ease of use.
Thank you. Group 3. Carmen, maybe if you could read people may not know what group they were in. Do you have the list of who was in group 3?
Yes, it was the group with Leslie Margolis, that Kelly Meisner and Allison, Leslie, Rebecca, Bess, Tom Gardner, Michael Brown, Julie, Angie, Denora, Rhea, Allison, and Kelly.
Tom, I think you should speak for us.
Tom,
All right,
you've
I'll
been
give it a go.
volunteered.
I'll give it a go then. So we've talked about quite a few things. I think there's positive things coming out of MSD as far as accountability. I think part of the concern is what is being measured. Is that what's, in my words, being taught at the ground level? I agree with the last speaker that there needs to be a pool of supports that I think strictly aligned that presents clarity to what the state wants and what they're measuring. So at the LEAs, local LEAs and school levels that we can present supports. I think there are some questions to SDI through both the preparatory programs coming in, the staff that is trained enough or at least be able to connect with the pedagogy to today's student, which has been they've changed big time in the last couple of years. I think also that we need to look at some, depending on where you are in the state, are the supports and I think Scott brought up in the past, are the supports aligned, I think, fairly, equitably across the state? Because what Washington County does should be the same supports that Worcester should be able to do, because we know with the clarity that's aligned to MCAP and HSAs, are we doing the right things at our levels and do we measure them correctly? So I think there's a lot of positives that are happening, but also some things that MSC can maybe take the shoulder weight off of the LEAs, because if you could do the groundwork on top, we can work with Kinsel on the bottom. And I think once we get there in this group, this is where I think in the very beginning, this could be the mother of all work groups if we can actually support kids. And right now I'm hearing a lot of big things, but I think we're working on things that are getting us in the direction to be able to support kids. I don't know if I did a good synopsis.
One clarification question, Tom. I don't know if others have it, but you made the comment twice about making sure that MSDE is measuring or monitoring what's important. I just wanted to, what I was wondering, and maybe others are, from the perspective of the group, what did you feel was being measured and what did you feel should be measured? Just a little more detail there might be helpful.
Yeah, so I gave an example. In my primary grade levels, we use a Dibbles assessment. But often we spend a lot of time in our Dibbles assessments and our interims to see how that aligns to, for example, MCAP, the assessment that the state's using. And we spend a lot of time trying to streamline that to be able to understand, is this a great assessment or not? If the MSD could work to shoulder some of these assessments using like assessments across the state, that allows us to do more digging with the students and working with kids, knowing that we're using a good assessment piece that's leading us in the direction that we need to go. Does that
Super
help?
helpful. Yeah, totally. I had not made that connection, so I appreciate that connection. How about group 4? And you can see the group members in the chat. Thank you, whoever put it there.
Hi, I was in group 4. I'm Lisa Melody. I work in Baltimore County Public Schools. A lot of what we talked about has been said. So, we're second, thirding, fourthing, and fifthing, all of that good stuff. One of the things, though, I will say that I was thinking of as we started talking is, I wonder what these discussions would sound like with these questions with a school-based IEP team. How would they answer the question? So I think part of it, what we talked about is that the IEP team, when they come to a table, not everybody is coming with the same level of knowledge, experience, background. And that includes, we always talk about, the gen ed folks aren't quite sure, but also how are we supporting families to help them understand this crazy process and what it all means. The other big thing that we talked about was really around having, and this is something that in our smaller group I had said in one of our meetings, but like we as a district or as an LEA, we're looking for the partnership of MSDE to help us figure out how we can make things better. Audits are great, but they always feel punitive because a lot of times then there's this corrective action plan at the end, and which we all know that those things need to happen, but sometimes we are struggling to figure out how to make those changes, and it would be really helpful to have folks come and say, well, let's look at what you have. Let's look at your resources. Let's look at whatever. And a lot of the technical assistance that comes out doesn't really get down to the school level in some cases, which is partially LEA's responsibility, but it's sort of like, how does, does MSDE maybe have a plan for how that could happen? Because that's a struggle, because again, as we've all talked, there's no time. And then we also talked about, like, wouldn't it be great if MSDE had like a clearinghouse of information about all these different resources that are out there that we could then look at our students and say, hey, that might work, that might work. We don't have the time that we would like to put into looking at all of these items while we're also trying to educate kiddos. And then I think one of the last things is just consistency, which we've heard a lot today, but it's even consistency down to, we're both monitoring a kid's progress on a goal, but like, are we even using the same tool for that one kid? Not that everybody's using the same tool for every kid, but that we've decided this is how we're going to monitor that, so that we have kind of clean, consistent data. And then just getting folks out of their silos, because one of the things we were saying is, like, we sit at a table and it's like, well, here are the speech goals, here are the math goals. But as soon as a kid walks in that building, we all own everything about them. We all need to be aware of what all of their needs are, and to make sure that, and own and be accountable for implementing accommodations and modifications. Or, I mean, I know in my life, I've trained the cafeteria staff with a student who had a certain need, and they were awesome, but we all need to own that in order for kids to be successful everywhere.
Thanks, Lisa. That's super helpful. Before we jump to group 5, I just wanted to respond to something in the chat that, yes, we did have folks taking notes in each of the groups. We will collate those and get them out to folks as well. So you will have a chance to read and get a little more detail of the conversations that took place in the groups who weren't able to join. So group 5.
Hi, Aggie Callahan from Villa Maria School, representing group 5. We had a lot of common themes to what's been shared, which is, I guess, a good thing, a telling thing. One of the things we've heard from other groups, but we discussed almost in every question, is just the lack of knowledge about EBPs, evidence-based practices, and SDI, whether it's a general educator or special educator. Parents, we've talked about parents in our group needing more training and more just opportunities maybe to come to virtual sessions to learn about the IEP process, and maybe even before the IEP process, just learning about some of these evidence-based practices and things that they can be expecting to see from their education team. We talked a lot about families needing some more interpretation services and things needing to be provided in Spanish more. That was brought up, or other languages, specifically in the MSDE resources that are available. So apparently the PDFs aren't translatable. So that was a issue that was brought up. So I think another highlight, the question about the IEP, should it include the evidence-based practices? We absolutely think we've lost our way a little bit with the IEP. We talked about the IEPs are kind of looking cookie cutter. They're really aligned with state standards and grade level standards versus really explicitly stating in there what this student needs. And I think maybe the IEP should even prompt us, what evidence-based practices does the team recommend for this student, to get us thinking about it and get us in the habit of definitely explicitly saying that in the child's plan, so that it's not so cookie cutter looking. And then reasonably calculated and NJRF, we talked a lot about that. We agree with everybody else. I don't think there's an understanding. I think the statewide, we need a common language when it comes to determining that. And how much data do you look at the last 6 months to predict the next 6 months? Like, what is the standard? What are the expectations for calculating that? And again, making sure that it's individualized and not what you would expect a third grader to do. It needs to really be for that student. And then we were discussing a little bit about SDI and RTI integration, and that there needs to be a better tracking. It should be really tracked together. There shouldn't be separate processes happening, and that can be confusing. We can lose things that way. So how can we integrate? We should be meeting regularly, discussing progress. Even, you could argue for a gen ed kid as a preventative measure to maybe avoid having to get special education services if it's not needed. Are we looking at those things? Is there a process in place for progress monitoring in the gen ed setting? And then more collaboration between special education and general education teachers. So we should all be able to design and deliver SDI. It should be decided together as a team, again, like what that particular student needs. It shouldn't be, oh, that's that person's role, not mine. So just more collaboration. And I guess it's a time, training. There's a lot of issues involved with that. And we think the IEP has become too complicated and it's not child-centered enough. So just getting back to basics and focusing on that particular student is what we need to do.
Great. Well, thank you, all 5 groups. Super thoughtful. Also, I think somewhat encouraging that there is a lot of overlap. I think there are definitely some very clear trends and themes emerging, and some very good ideas on perhaps next steps for MSDE, which I think brings us to the second to last part of today's meeting. Having a great conversation. Thank you. Having a great conversation. If you could jump me to the exit ticket slide. Having a great conversation, getting a chance to share and discuss and think with your peers and work group members, definitely a good way to spend an afternoon. But ultimately, we need to bring this home in the form of some very specific things that will go into the report, very specific recommendations, very specific next steps for MSDE coming out of the working group. So what we'd like to do is later tonight or tomorrow, you will get a link to an exit ticket. The reason we're doing this is we really want to make sure that every single person who participated has a chance to share their biggest thoughts and an opportunity to make suggestions for recommendations that should go into our report. So the exit ticket's going to ask you that, and you can see it on the screen there, essentially, what are the steps MSDE can take? And hopefully you can be as specific. Great. Carmen just shared that all of you have the exit ticket in your email. Thank you for real-time support, Carmen. What are the steps MSDE can take? Really asking for as much specificity as possible, thinking about whether it's providing standard, evidence-based practice standards, technical assistance, things around data, analysis, monitoring. What are the levers that the MSDE has at their disposal? What could they be doing to help make SDI more realistically being put into IEPs, more having at the right level of rigor, making sure that it's evidence-based practices designed to get meaningful growth. So that's kind of the summary of your big thoughts on today's topic. That's point number 1. We really want to make sure everybody has had a chance to be heard and influence the discussion. And we will of course share what people put in the exit ticket. The second thing we're going to ask you is, what would you like to suggest as a recommendation or recommendations that would go into the report based on today's conversation, the pre-readings, the summaries that you'll get of the conversations. Anybody can make a suggestion for a recommendation. A smaller steering committee will take a look at those recommendations. I suspect there'll be some overlap. We will try to form them into a smaller number that covers the waterfront, what was shared. We'll begin the next meeting by discussing and reviewing any recommendations that were put forward. So that's kind of the cycle. We'll end today with you a chance to reflect. You get till next few days to suggest recommendations. Then we will take it up as a group at our next meeting. And as Dr. Hickman and as Liz shared, we really tried to change the format of today's meeting based on what we heard from you all. I'm sure we did not get everything right. So we'd love to know what worked well in today's meeting and what could still be improved. This is still a work in progress. With that, I'd like to folks to take about 2 minutes to just pause, grab a piece of paper, pen, and just think about if you had to summarize your own thoughts at this moment, 2 hours of a lot of discussion, to think about these exit ticket questions. Don't jump into the tool, don't write full answers yet, but just 2 minutes to reflect as to where you are, and then we'll wrap up in 2 minutes. Okay, I don't know whether 2 minutes of silent reflection seems like a really long time or a really short time, but it was 2 minutes. Obviously, the point of the exit ticket is to give you a chance when you are not rushed and it's not 6 p.m. at the end of a long day to really reflect and share your thoughts and your suggestions for recommendations. We are not going to put a firm time limit on when you have to get the exit ticket back. We would definitely encourage you to do it while it's fresh in your mind. But I think I want to turn it over Dr. Hickman and Liz for any closing thoughts, comments, and next steps.
First, and just say thank you all for joining. And I did put a quick note in the chat that something that we didn't say, maybe Nate did say, that the groups that you're in now will be your assigned group for the next few meetings. We heard some of your requests to be in a group and kind of stay consistent on some things, so we'll do that. But thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please, Brian? Can you go to the, you stop. So if you're looking at the next meeting, February 28th, from 4 to 6 in the virtual format for all participants. The next time the guiding question will be, how can MSDE ensure effective implementation of IEPs, including technical assistance, monitoring, and uniform data collection? In terms of takeaways, reading recommendations, and requested data and supporting analysis. Those things are all applicable and will be shared as discussed. You can find this information will be posted on the Blueprint website, especially the Workgroup webpage for this conversation. The recordings will be uploaded and documents as they have been. Moving on to the next slide, please. Therefore, this may be the first time you see this, or see that the dates prior to, they were up to April, I believe. But anyway, these are all the way through to December, and we shall just stay in communication until then, to the report. We have a report due December 1st. That's it, Ms. Zogby.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two quick closing thoughts. One is, I hope everyone enjoyed the small group discussions. For me to hear from administrators, teachers on the ground, advocates, parents, to have those interactions, I think was really powerful. And I think where we find a lot of overlap, where we might think that we don't, but actually, I think we actually found a lot of common cause. Which is great. And I just want to encourage you when it comes to sort of thinking about specific recommendations, try to focus as much as you can on the topic that we've covered here, because as you look at that projected series of topics, we're going to get to each one in turn, and each, they're all interrelated and they're all very big. And that's a challenge, but I think, we don't want to necessarily do recommendations based on topics we haven't had that opportunity yet to sort of tap our expertise and read about and reflect on together. And I guess the last thing about recommendations, don't think about it as a recommendation that we're going to stick in the report in December, right? This is going to begin to guide the work of MSDE starting now, which doesn't mean Dr. Hickman's going to finish it next month or 6 months from now, but plans will be defined based on recommendations that we make that will begin the work now and be ongoing. It's not going to be a report that gets filed in December and then put on a shelf. It's the beginning of this transformative work that we're undertaking together. So thank you very much. I really appreciate being with you all tonight.
Great. Same great way to end. Liz, I got nothing else to say. Everybody, thank you so very, very much. Have a great night. Fill out those exit tickets. We really want to know what you're thinking and look forward to doing this again soon. Thanks, everybody.